Hey there, friends. Get ready for a heartwarming, soul-stirring story that'll tug at your heartstrings and remind you of the power of kindness. This is the tale of Grace Donnelly, a woman whose quiet courage in a small-town cafe sparked a movement that reached far beyond the coffee cups she poured. It's a story of loyalty, love, and standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. So, grab a cozy seat, maybe a warm drink, and let's dive into this incredible journey. In the heart of Mason, Georgia, just a short 15-minute drive from Fort Gringanger, one of the largest Marine bases in the Southeast, sits the Mason Mug Café. Picture a charming little spot straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Oak-lined sidewalks, American flags fluttering on porches, and a hardware store that hasn't changed its paint since the Reagan era. But inside the Mason Mug, oh, it's something special. It's warm, it's human, and it's all because of Grace Donnelly. At 35, Grace wasn't the kind of person who demanded attention. But once you met her, you'd never forget her. She ran the cafe like it was her second home, a place where anyone, especially veterans, could walk in and feel like they belonged. No fancy espresso martinis or frothy latte art here. Just strong, hot coffee, endless refills, and a bulletin board covered in handwritten notes. Grace remembered names, birthdays, even deployment blackout dates. She knew who liked their eggs over hard and who hadn't touched coffee since Iraq. For veterans carrying invisible scars, she offered something rare. A space for silence, for healing, for being seen without judgment. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m. sharp, Grace hosted Heroes Hour, a quiet tradition that started with just 3 regulars. Her father-in-law, Ben Donnelly, a retired Marine drill instructor, Ralph, a Vietnam vet who rarely spoke but never missed a week, and Louisa, an Army nurse whose laugh rang like wind chimes. Over time, the circle grew. Veterans from Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. They all found their way to Grace's cafe, drawn not by the menu but by the woman who made everyone feel like family. "This is a place to be seen, not fixed," she'd say, her voice steady and warm. "To sit, not perform." And they'd nod, shoulders relaxing, as they sipped coffee and shared stories. Some funny, some heavy, some too painful for words. Grace's own story? Well, the town knew the outline. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly, was killed in action 6 years ago in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. His photo hung above the cafe's register, not in uniform, but in jeans and flannel, holding a mug outside the cafe's door. It was taken 2 weeks before his final deployment. Grace never remarried, never even hinted at it. Instead, she poured her grief into the Mason Mug, turning it into a sanctuary for others. Veterans called her Ma'am with genuine respect. Teens held the door for her without being told. Even the mayor stopped by monthly to thank her for holding Mason together better than any institution could. But for Grace, it wasn't about recognition. It was about the mission, the quiet one, the one that didn't come with medals but mattered just as much. Every time she poured coffee for a vet too anxious to sit in a crowd, every time she checked on someone staring out the window too long, every time she let a service dog curl up under a table without a fuss, she was living that mission. It wasn't a rulebook she followed, it was instinct. It was love. And then came that crisp Wednesday morning, the kind where sunlight feels cooler than it looks and steam rises from coffee cups like little ghosts. Started like any other day at the Mason Mug. The bell jingled softly, regulars filed in, and Grace was behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back, greeting everyone with her quiet, warm nod. She'd brewed the first pot of dark roast for Heroes Hour and set out the ceramic mugs she saved just for the veterans. Then the door opened, and Ray McMillan stepped in with Shadow, his black lab German Shepherd mix, by his side. Ray, a late 50s ex-Marine Corps recon vet, didn't talk much and never stayed long. But he came, and that meant something. Shadow, wearing a bright red vest that read "Service Dog, Do Not Pet," stayed close to Ray's heel. "Table by the windows open," Grace said, flashing a gentle smile. Ray nodded, murmured a thanks, and settled in the far corner with Shadow. But then, the air shifted. The door swung open with a brisk whoosh, and in walked a man in a navy blazer, pressed slacks, and an expression that seemed allergic to joy. His name tag read Logan Prescott, State Health Inspector, and he carried a clipboard like it was a badge of honor. Grace hadn't been expecting him. "Can I help you find something?" she asked politely. "An inspection," he replied flatly. Unannounced, Prescott moved through the cafe with cold precision, tapping surfaces, checking labels, opening fridge doors. Then he saw Shadow. He froze, pointing like he'd spotted a crime scene. "That animal," he said loudly, "is in violation of state health code. No animals permitted where food is served." Heads turned. Conversations hushed. Grace stepped out from behind the counter, her voice calm but firm. "He's a registered service dog. Federal law permits his presence here." Prescott's frown deepened, his eyes scanning the room for backup. "I don't care what vest he's wearing," he snapped. "Animals carry dander, saliva, hair. This is a food hazard. Unless you want this cafe shut down, that dog goes." Ray stiffened in his chair, his hand gripping his coffee cup tightly. Shadow didn't move, just looked up at Ray, waiting. The room fell silent. Grace took a slow breath and said the words she knew would change everything. "I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're welcome to write your report, but you'll do it knowing you tried to humiliate a man who served this country in front of the very people he fought to protect." Prescott's jaw clenched. Someone in the cafe muttered, "Damn right." But then, another figure appeared in the doorway. Deborah Lyle, the regional manager for the Mason Muggs parent company. She'd arrived early for a routine check-in, just in time to witness the standoff. Her eyes were wide, her tone icy. "Grace Donnelly," she said, "you've just violated a direct health compliance policy in front of a state inspector. Pack your things. You're terminated." Gasps rippled through the cafe. A spoon clattered to the floor. Ray stood halfway, stunned. Grace didn't move at first. Then she looked around, at Ray, at Shadow, at the chalkboard that read Heroes Hour, free coffee for vets. She smiled, just barely, untied her apron with trembling hands, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Turning to Elena, the young barista by the espresso machine, she whispered, "Make sure Ray gets his refill." Then she walked out into the morning sunlight, leaving the cafe frozen behind her. No one followed, but someone pressed record. Somewhere in the vast web of phones and social media, a quiet act of defiance was captured. A line drawn. A woman fired not for breaking a rule, but for refusing to break her soul. And far away, in an office lined with military photos and brass nameplates, Colonel Richard Gaines got a phone call he couldn't ignore. For 35 minutes, the Mason Mug was silent. Customers whispered. Some left their coffee half-drunk. Others sat still, glancing out the window as if answers might drift in with the breeze. Elena stayed at her post, hands trembling as she poured Ray's second cup. "I didn't know what to say," she'd later admit. "But I knew if I left that station, I'd be letting Grace down." Ray sat quietly, his coffee untouched since Grace left. Shadow lay curled at his feet, ears twitching, as if he sensed something had broken in the room. Then it began, a low rumble, like distant thunder rolling across Georgia hills. Chairs wobbled, coffee rippled, windows hummed. Customers stood peering out. From the east end of Main Street, through the morning mist and maple-lined sidewalks, came 4 military Humvees, their tires growling against the pavement, lights cutting through the haze. They pulled into the cafe slot in a slow, deliberate line, blocking the front. Doors opened in unison, and out stepped Colonel Richard Gaines, decorated and composed in full Marine Corps dress blues. Gold buttons gleaming, white gloves in hand, ribbons numerous, expression unreadable. Behind him, 24 Marines followed in sharp formation, standing at attention on the sidewalk. Inside, no one moved. Prescott, the inspector, stood frozen near the pastry case, his clipboard forgotten. Deborah Lyle paled and stepped back from the counter. The bell jingled once, and Colonel Gaines entered alone. His boots struck the floor, slow, deliberate, echoing like a drum roll. He stopped in the center, glancing at Elena, who swallowed hard, then at Ray, who stood slowly. Their eyes met. Ray nodded. The colonel returned it with a salute. Prescott stammered, I didn't know he was. Gaines didn't raise his voice. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity. He turned to Elena. Is Grace Donnelly here? Elena shook her head. She was fired for standing up for Mr. Macmillan and Shadow. Gaines' jaw tightened. That woman served the families of this base better than most agencies combined. She gave my men a place to breathe when they came home with no words. She treated a decorated Marine with the respect this nation promised him, and forgot. Ray cleared his throat, speaking for the first time. She didn't ask questions, he said softly. She didn't flinch when I walked in with a dog. She just poured the coffee and gave me a place to sit. That was the first time in a long time I felt like a person again. A tear slipped down a customer's cheek near the register. Gaines nodded, then turned to the Marines outside. With a simple hand signal, they moved. 2 Marines removed the corporate logo from the wall, folding it like a flag. Another replaced the chalkboard with a new sign, hand-painted in bold white letters, Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily. When Deborah Lyle tried to protest, Gaines looked at her once. You've made your decision, he said. Now we'll make ours. He stepped outside, phone in hand. Moments later, Elena's phone buzzed. It's a message from Fort Gringanger, she said, confused. They've requested Grace report to base headquarters today. Ray exhaled, eyes wide. Shadow stood, tail wagging faintly. In that cafe, once a place of coffee and comfort, something new was brewing, a reckoning. Grace sat in her truck on the edge of her driveway, keys in hand, engine off. She'd been there for 15 minutes, still in her coffee-stained jeans, blue flannel and worn shoes. She replayed the morning, fired for doing the right thing. Then the message from the base. Colonel Gaines wanted to meet at Fort Gringanger. She didn't know what it meant, but deep down, she felt a shift. Something bigger than the Mason mug was beginning. Taking a breath, she turned the ignition and drove the familiar road. Not to drop off muffins, but through the gates of Fort Gringanger. The base was a city of order. Flag-lined avenues, cadence calls echoing. Grace had been there as a military wife, but now, walking into the administration building, she felt like an outsider. Colonel Gaines met her at the door, now in a khaki uniform, his presence calm but commanding. Grace, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. She shook it, unsure. I'm not entirely sure why I'm here. He smiled faintly. Let me show you something. He led her down a hallway lined with portraits, maps, and plaques, stopping at a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside were folding chairs, whiteboards, and boxes of supplies. Young staffers moved quietly, setting up therapy mats. This is a pilot program, Gaines explained. We've been trying to get it off the ground for 2 years. Trouble is, it's hard to find someone who understands veterans. Not just from paperwork, but from the inside. Grace folded her arms. I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree. Gaines shook his head. You built a place where men and women with invisible wounds came to heal. You did more with coffee and kindness than some programs do with $1 million budget. Grace didn't reply immediately. Gaines softened his tone. You created a sanctuary without realizing it. That's leadership. That's service. A voice called from the back. Is that her? A young woman, mid-20s, stepped out, burned scars along her arms and jaw. Her name tag read Tiffany Rios. A golden retriever puppy in a red training vest walked beside her. Hi, Tiffany said shyly. I saw the video of you and the dog and the guy. I haven't been to a coffee shop since I came home, but I think I could sit in a place you run. Grace's chest tightened. Gaines smiled. We'd like to offer you a position, not a figurehead, not a name on a brochure, but as the director of this center. Grace exhaled. You're serious? As a heart attack, he said. You'd run the programs, build the space, shape the culture. You already know what works. Community, routine, respect. Grace looked at Tiffany, kneeling with her dog, and thought of Ray, Shadow, and the dozens who'd found peace in her cafe. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Gaines nodded. "Then let's get to work." That night, Grace stood alone in what would become the heart of Fort Gringanger's outreach. The walls were bare, the floors scuffed, but the air felt sacred. She pulled out a photo of Michael, her husband, sitting outside the cafe, boots up, smiling. She pinned it to the wall, no frame, just memory and mission. Word spread fast. By week's end, the Veteran Transition and Wellness Center wasn't just a program. It was alive. Veterans who hadn't visited the base in years showed up. Young soldiers brought hesitant spouses. The Mason Herald ran a full-page story, From Café to Command, how Grace Donnelly is rebuilding trust one cup at a time. Grace didn't do anything flashy, no fancy speakers or consultants. She did what she'd always done, paid attention. She remembered names, kept a whiteboard for who needs a ride, who needs a listener. She let dogs curl up in therapy rooms and added pages to her old cafe notebook for every vet who walked through the door. Ray came often, Shadow settling in his favorite corner. Tiffany showed up every Tuesday, sketching dogs and homecomings. Elena, the barista, visited Fridays, bringing coffee and laughter, helping with everything from wallpaper to website wording. But not everyone was thrilled. Some officials questioned why someone without formal training was running a federal program. Auditors arrived, clipboards in hand, asking probing questions, even testing the coffee machine's water filters. One inspector stared at Grace and asked, "What certifications qualify you to counsel veterans?" She didn't blink. "I don't have certifications," she said softly. "Just consistency and kindness." He took notes. A week later, a notice arrived. The Wellness Center was being reviewed for national expansion. Gaines called it a victory. Grace called it humbling. Still, the Mason mug tugged at her heart. One afternoon, she returned quietly. Elena was behind the counter. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased, sliding over a mug. "Just here for coffee," Grace said, smiling. The cafe had changed. Photos of vets lined the walls. Ray, Tiffany, others. A new sign hung near the register, Grace's Corner, where no one sits alone. Later, Grace spoke at a local fundraiser for veteran families. A modest event with crayon posters and older folks. She spoke without notes. "I didn't set out to build a program," she said. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." The crowd fell silent, then erupted in applause. In the back, Ray stood, his silver star pinned to his chest, and gave her a quiet salute. That night at the center, Grace added a photo to the wall. The cafe the day after the Humvees came. People shoulder to shoulder, dogs under tables, coffee in every hand. Above it, she taped a card. "Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves. It's what we protect in others." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense, stamped with a gold emblem. Gaines handed it to Grace in her office. "You'll want to sit for this," he said. She opened it slowly. The words blurred. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She read it again. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Gaines chuckled. "That's exactly why you're getting it." The letter invited her to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C. Grace felt her knees weaken. "I'm not a public speaker." "You are now," Gaines said. She packed light. A blazer, Michael's old watch, and her cafe notebook. Names, birthdays, notes like, "Tiffany prefers tea," and "Don't ask Ray about May 15th. At the airport, a voice called, "Need a ride, Miss Donnelly?" Ray stood in dress blues, Shadow by his side. "The base assigned me as your escort," he said, grinning. Grace laughed. "You clean up pretty good. You're the one about to speak to the Pentagon," he smirked. The conference ballroom was grand. White tablecloths, polished brass podium, cameras everywhere. Grace's name glowed on the screen. Her voice was small, but the room leaned in. "I'm not a general, a doctor, or a policymaker. I managed a cafe. I served coffee. I listened. But in that space, I watched something sacred happen. Veterans came not for advice, but for presence. They didn't need to be fixed, they needed to be seen. One day, I got fired for letting a man sit with his service dog. That moment changed everything. But the truth is, it was never about coffee. It was about dignity. Applause thundered. Ray stood in the back, nodding like a soldier hearing clear orders. That night, outside the Potomac, a man with a white beard approached. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked. Grace studied his face. He showed her a faded photo. Her, Michael, and him in uniform outside the cafe, long before Michael's last deployment. "You poured me coffee the day I got my medical discharge. You just smiled. It was the first time I felt like myself again." He handed her the photo. "It's yours now." Grace took it, words caught in her throat. Back in Mason, the town held a welcome celebration, but Grace went straight to the wellness center. A few veterans lingered by the fire pit. She added the conference photo, a standing ovation, next to the cafe photo with Michael and the soldier. Below, she wrote, "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." A young veteran stepped through the door, eyes nervous. "Is this the place for, people like us?" Grace smiled. "No, son. This is the place for people like all of us." Her circle wasn't just full, it was open. In a fast-moving world, it's easy to miss the quiet moments. A soft-spoken waitress, a trembling veteran, a service dog's wagging tail. But those moments shape us. Grace Donnelly didn't wear a uniform or hold rank, but she upheld something sacred: dignity. She reminded us that honor isn't earned once. It's defended daily. What happened in that small Georgia cafe might seem rare, but maybe it shouldn't be. How many graces have we passed without noticing? How many veterans have we thanked with words, not actions? We'd love to hear from you. Have you witnessed a quiet act of courage? Been touched by someone's grace? Share your story below. It might inspire someone to do the right thing, even when it's hard. If this moved you, subscribe, and share with someone who believes in quiet heroes. Here, we tell stories that honor not just the uniform, but the humanity behind it. Because sometimes the strongest stand doesn't come with a salute. Thanks for joining us today.